welcome back to my channel. My name is Dani and today it's time to talk about all the books I read in April. So let's talk about books. In April, I participated in the Magical Readathon and I read a total of 10 books. Not all of them fit the prompt of the Magical Readathon, but I did complete my career, which was journalist/writer. So I'm gonna go for that on the nudes as well. I have a spreadsheet that I created that is not officially linked to the Magical Readathon whatsoever, but I'm going to link that in the description if you're interested to have something to help you keep track of what you have to read for your career in the Magical Readathon and what prompts there are for each of them. You can just check that spreadsheet because I think it's helpful. Before we start, I just want to remind you to go check my May TBR video so you can vote for which of these 5 books you want me to read in the month of May. One of them I already started. I'm not going to tell you which one, but you can see which one is winning the poll. But you can go vote for any of the other 4 because then I will definitely read it in May. Here's my new TBR basket. I don't have a TBR cart and I'm using these baskets just to have my monthly TBR, and they barely fit for this month because I read a lot. It's not normal for me to read this much, but all of them are fairly short. So I'm going to talk about them in the order that I read in the month. And if they did fit in one of the Magical Readathon prompts, I'm going to tell you that as well. The first book I read in the month was Sword of Destiny by Andrzej Sapkowski. If you know how to say his name, please let me know. So this is the second book in the Witcher series. It's the second one that has short stories. It's before the actual novels start. And I gave this one 3.5 stars. I like the first one much more than this as a whole, but the last 2 stories in this were really good. So I'm really excited I read it, and I'm really excited to start the actual novels now. I think I'm gonna enjoy them more because the short stories were a little bit complicated for me to follow because there are many characters that doesn't seem to be at least that important, and also the timeline in this is very confusing for me. And like I said, the last 2 stories are really good and I recommend it. I read this for the prompt of reading a book with witches or wizards for History of Magic. The second book I read in April was The Hiding Place by CJ Tudor. This one I read for Muggle Studies to read a book in the perspective of a Muggle. I gave this one 4 stars and I enjoyed it so much as the first one of this author, The Chalkman. This was really good. This tells a story about a man who goes back to his hometown because he kind of wants to investigate some weird things that is happening, and they're also linked to weird things that happened when he lived there as a child. I'm not gonna tell much more. It's a thriller and a lot of the premise of the story is told throughout the story, so I think that's enough for you to go into this book. And this was very surprising to me because, again, I'm not going to say what, but it has a trope in thrillers or horror novels that I usually don't think I will like, but I think this was done very well and I really liked it, and I do recommend it. I've read a lot of reviews about it and a lot of people say that this is very similar. The premise and the plot is very similar to Pet Sematary by Stephen King, which I have not read. So a lot of people who have read it didn't like this one so much because they said it was too similar. Just saying that you might not like it if you read the other one, but I wouldn't be able to tell because I haven't read it. I haven't read Pet Sematary, but if you haven't, I do recommend it. It's really good. It's a lot of fun, and all of the books are short and it's very easy to read. The third book I read in April was the Brazilian book called Wan Jia Veronica, which would be translated as Good Morning Veronica. This is by Rafael Montes and Ilana Cassoy, and I read it for Care of Magical Creatures, which was to read a book with a creature that has a beak on the cover. And like I said, this has a kind of a bird foot on the cover, and this creature definitely has a beak. I gave this book 4 stars as well, and it was a complicated one for me because I think it has a lot of issues in the story that the characters are very sexist, and that usually wouldn't be a problem if the book is trying to defy that, but I don't think he was. At the same time that the sexist characters were saying all these bad things about women, the women characters in this book weren't that well developed at all. The main character is a woman and she's kind of stupid, to be honest. At the same time, this was so much fun. Like, it wasn't over the top sexist and problematic. It was just like some hints here and there, which wasn't part of the plot at all. And because the plot was so entertaining and so much fun and just so intriguing and exciting, I still gave this book 4 stars. I acknowledge that it has a lot of issues in that sense, but I still think it's such a fun read. It wasn't translated yet, but if you do read Portuguese, I recommend it a lot. And I think it has like the best of these two authors in it. And you can't really tell that it was written by two authors. It's one voice throughout the whole book, which is great. The plot of this book is that there's a woman, Veronica, who works at a police station as a secretary, and she sees a woman jumping from the building and committing suicide. And around the same time, maybe in the same day, I don't remember, she gets a call from another woman saying that she's suspecting her husband on some weird stuff. And Veronica decides to investigate that on her own, which is already part of why she's stupid. But she decides to investigate this on her own, and she finds out a lot of really bad stuff. Again, if you know Portuguese and you can read it, I really recommend. And if you've been to Brazil, I think it's even better to understand how this stuff does actually, unfortunately, happen. But yeah, it was really fun. The next book I read in April was The Kingdom of Back by Mary Lou, and I already have a dedicated review for this book, which is the first one in my series of our Great Book and Box. And I really recommend you check it out. I'm gonna leave that in the cards. So do go check my full thoughts on this book and also which our Great book I'm gonna read this month. I gave this book pretty much 4.5 out of 5 stars, and it tells the story of Mozart's sister and of Mozart, the boy, and her growing up in a very controlling household, and their father was very strict on them practicing music all the time. And she loved to compose, she loved to perform, and she was really good. She was so talented as much as her brother, but she knew that as she was growing older, she wouldn't be able to keep doing that because she was a woman. I talk a lot on my review about how this book is infuriating, but at the same time, it's a beautiful fairy tale. And I so recommend it. If you like magical realism or fairy tales and historical fiction, read this book. It's so good. This book fit the prompt of arithmancy, which is to read a book not in your favorite genre, and I'm so glad I did. The next book I read in April was another Brazilian book called Momentariness Guru, which would be translated to A Woman in the Dark, by Rafael Montes as well, one of the same authors of the other one that I mentioned. And this one fit the prompt of herbology, which was to read a book that starts with an M. I also gave this book 4 stars, and I think I enjoyed it more than Wan Jia Veronica because it didn't have some of the issues that I mentioned before. This book starts when a boy gets inside this girl's house. She's called Victoria. A boy gets inside Victoria's house and murders her whole family except her. She sees everything and she grows up very messed up because of that. She's such a flawed character. She just has flaws, really. She's messed up, and for a good reason. At one point here, when she's older, the past comes back to her in a way that I'm not gonna tell you. This again was not translated to English yet, but his books are being translated to English, so I'm very hopeful that this one will be as well. And I really recommend if you want a very creepy and thrilling thriller to read. Some of the stuff in the ending was expected, but it would be impossible for me to expect all of the things that were happening there. It started to build up a lot for something to happen, and it was so much bigger than I thought it would be. So I really enjoyed it, and I really recommend if you read Portuguese or if it's ever translated to English. I actually said the order wrong because before I read that one, I read All Systems Red by Martha Wells, but it's okay. This is the first book in the Murderbot Diaries series, and it's a novella. It's very, very short, and I gave this one 3.5 stars. I think almost 4, but still it is a 3.5. And I think the main reason for that is because it was so short and it couldn't explore so much the things that she's talking about here. The main character of this book is Murderbot, who is a robot designed to protect people. It's very blurry. Essentially, this robot only wants to consume pop culture and not actually do its job, which is a fascinating premise, but we don't see a lot of this in here, honestly. I thought there would be more because of how much people talk about it, but it's actually the story of this spaceship that is in another planet. Some mysterious things starts happening, and they go investigate, and the robot has to protect them and has to figure it out as well. I really like the idea of this story, but I feel like I was left out on what is going on because it talks a lot about this company that rules everything and different names for different robots and for different world things in here, and it's not explained to the reader ever. That's the same way I felt with Strange the Dreamer, which I read half the book and I still didn't know what was going on. I felt so left out of the story that I just put it down. But this one was very short, so I kept reading it, and I did buy the rest of the novellas, and I pre-ordered the full book because I want to give it a chance. I think it's a great premise, and I want to see if this will all be explained, or at least if, as the story goes, I will understand it more and feel more like it was a book written for someone to read and not just a story that's happening. I don't know if it makes sense, but that's how I felt about it. It's a really cool sci-fi that I recommend. It's so short, so give it a try if you're interested in it at all. But I do hope I'm gonna like the rest of the novellas more. This one fit the prompt of astronomy, which was to read a book while it's dark. And I pretty much read this book almost in one sitting at night and then a little bit in another night, so everything while it was dark. The next book I read in April was Night of the Silver Circle by Duncan M. Hamilton. This is the second one in the Dragon's Lair trilogy, which I read the first one last year. And this, the same as the first one, is simply a very fun fantasy with dragons. It's not necessarily memorable. It's not changing the way fantasy is written. It relies a lot on what we expect of dragons and what we expect of this type of medieval-like fantasy. So in this case, it doesn't have to explain because we already, at least I have a lot of background on what this is supposed to be like, and it's not changing anything. It's just picking the same dragons that we've heard so much about, so many books and so many movies, and it's just putting a new story around them. It's a very short book, and the first one was also very short. So again, not a lot of world building, not a lot of character development. It's simply a fun story with dragons. And I gave this 3.5 stars. And that's why, like, it was a lot of fun. It's still a good rating because I had fun. But it's not the best book I've ever read, and it's not gonna blow anyone's mind, probably. This book fit the prompt of Transfiguration because it has shape-shifting in it. And it also completed my Dragon Tamer training because I had to read a book about dragons. And that was all I had on my TBR for April, and I finished all those books, and I still had more than a week, I think, of the month left, which, again, that doesn't happen often to me. And it was my brother's birthday, and as his gift, I told him to pick a book for me to read. By the way, if you speak Portuguese, he also has a YouTube channel. I'm gonna link that in the description as well and put something there on the cards. But he picked 1984 by George Orwell. I honestly didn't remember if I had read this before. I just heard so much about it that I think I just thought I had read it. At least in Portuguese. I was sure I didn't read it in English, so I wanted to reread it anyway. And I'm really happy I did. I gave this one 4 stars as well. I'm pretty sure you already know what 1984 is about, but if you don't, it's a sci-fi. In this world, there's a totalitarian regime controlling everyone. This is more of a commentary on society and what could happen with society than anything. Like it still has a plot, which was more fun than I thought it would be, but it's still more of a political essay than it is a, a sci-fi novel, which is okay. I still have to watch the movie. I haven't watched the movie yet, but I'm very curious to see it. But the actual story of this book is that a man starts to realize that he's losing himself and who he really is in this government because of this government, and he wants to do something about it. It was very easy to read, except for like 10 pages there towards the end that has a book within this book that is just so boring to read. Again, very interesting, very important, just not fun. But the rest of the whole story is a lot of fun, and I do recommend it. It's a classic, but it's a modern classic, I guess. But it really is easy to read. So don't be afraid of it if you ever felt afraid of this book, because it's a fun story. For the magical readathon, I'm kind of trying to fit this in charms, which is to read a book with a white cover. It doesn't completely fit, but again, I didn't even need charms for my career, but it's the possibility. After I finished 1984 and still didn't know what to read next, I did a scavenger hunt. I'm gonna link that in the cards as well. And it was so much fun. You're gonna know what the result was already, but I do recommend you watch it because it's so funny. But the scavenger hunt basically told me to read Alice in Wonderland. So the name of the book is Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, and Through the Looking Glass was written by Lewis Carroll, and I gave this 4.5 out of 5 stars. This has always been one of my favorite classics. It was a reread for me, and I've always given this 5 out of 5 stars. But this time I lowered half star there. There were some parts, especially on the second book, that were more boring than I remembered, which was unfortunate, but still it's the best humor that I can find in a book. I love the nonsensical humor that he has and the play on words and all of that stuff. And I so recommend it. It's a children's book. It makes absolutely zero sense and it's amazing. The only prompt that I could try to fit in for the magical readathon would be divination, which is to use a number generator. It wasn't exactly a number generator, but it was a randomly selected book. So it could be there. Again, I don't need the other prompt, but it would be fun to fit all of them, right? And the last book I read in April was the complete trilogy of Binti by Nnedi Okorafor. I picked it up because if you watched my TBR video for April, I mentioned that for my book club at work, we were either going to read the first Binti novella or the first Murderbot novella, and Murderbot won in the votes, but I was still very interested in reading Binti. So I bought this on Book Outlet and I decided to read the whole trilogy. This also has another short story in between the first and the second novella. And this was a ride because the first novella was absolutely perfect. I loved it so much. It was like 10 stars. And I loved the short story between the two. And then I still loved the second novella. It would still be a 5 stars. Like I said, the first one was a 10 stars. So the second one would be a 5 stars. And the third one just went completely downhill. So in the end, I gave this 4 stars because the beginning and the middle were so good. But the last novella, it disappointed me so much. I was reading the whole thing at once, but I can still feel the separation. It's very fluid and that it continues right where the other one stopped. But I could feel the separation, which was good because then I could know that exactly the last one wasn't my problem. And this tells the story of Binti, who is a Himba girl, and she was accepted to go to Uzma University, which is a highly regarded university in another planet. And that's very hard for her family to deal with because they don't accept of people leaving their environment, and that's not part of their culture. But she really wants to go, and that's who she is. She wants to experience different things in her life. I'm not gonna tell you what's the third story about, but the reason why I felt it was so bad was that the characters felt very, very stupid in the end, in a way that they didn't feel like that in the rest of the novel, or the other novellas. So it bothered me a lot. And also, I felt like the themes that she was trying to convey here, the society where she lives is very sexist, and I think everything was very heavy-handed in a way that, again, it wasn't on the rest of the novellas. But mostly the characters were stupid. I liked the ending of the book, but like 75% of the third novella I hated so much, and I'm very disappointed about it. But what can we do? I should have stopped in the second novella. I don't know. I still recommend it if you like the first one. Just keep going because it's a beautiful world that she created, and the one thing that I really loved about it, especially well in the first and the second one, was that we can feel that it's bigger than Binti, and that she could keep writing novellas about or novels about this world forever because there's so much going on and there's so many different characters, so many different cultures, and it's beautiful. I really think she created a really beautiful world. I just didn't like the third novella, but that's it. I don't have a lot of prompts left in Magical Readathon, and I can't fit it in any of the ones that are left. I could say that the first novella fit for potions, which is to read a book under 150 pages. So let's go with that. That's it. Those were all the books I read in the month of April. Remember to vote for the ones that I'm reading in May. I'm so excited to know what you guys want me to read. And remember to leave a comment and to like this video and subscribe to my channel if you want to see more content from me. Thank you so much for joining me today.